I wasn't supposed to end up guarding other people's art. That wasn't the plan. When I was 20, I thought I'd be in the galleries, not walking through them with a flashlight and a badge. My professors said I had a painter's eye, that I understood shadow and human form in a way that felt intimate. I guess that's another word for desperate, because that's what painting always was for me. A way of begging the world to look at me. But people don't buy desperation. They buy serenity. And no one wanted to hang what I had to offer. So here I am, 38, divorced, behind on rent, my last exhibition forgotten. Nights spent drinking cheap alcohol and watching CCTV feeds, instead of brushstrokes drying on canvas. When I saw the ad, night shift security guard required, Bell Manor Art Gallery, quiet work, reliable pay, I took it without thinking twice. I needed the money, I needed familiar atmosphere. The Bell Gallery sat on the outskirts of Little Rock, a Victorian mansion-turned museum once owned by Abigail Bell, a socialite who died in 1891 under circumstances that no one seemed to fully agree on. Some said suicide. Others whispered about witchcraft and vanity, about how she'd made a pact to preserve her beauty forever. When I arrived for the interview, the curator, Mrs. Hanley, greeted me at the massive oak doors. She was a thin woman with eyes that looked as though they hadn't closed in weeks. "Mr. Keene," she said, shaking my hand, "you'll find our collection modest but quite sensitive." Her voice lingered strangely on that last word. Inside, the mansion smelled faintly of turpentine and something older, like dust mixed with wilted flowers. The marble floors reflected our footsteps as she led me through the grand foyer and into the main gallery. Mrs. Hanley's eyes flicked toward the small portfolio case slung over my shoulder. "Artist. Used to be," I said. "Now I just look after theirs." That earned me a faint knowing smile. "You'll fit right in here, Mr. Keene. Bell Manor appreciates people who understand the weight of art. Most guards only see paintings as pretty pictures. They don't grasp how alive these pieces can feel." She led me through the main corridor, the soles of our shoes whispering against marble. I tried not to stare at the portraits lining the walls. All the people were pale and finely dressed, their eyes gleaming with a kind of watchful patience. "They say this house was built from guilt," Mrs. Hanley said, running her hand along a gilded frame. "Abigail Bell commissioned it after her husband died. She filled it with beauty to keep out the ugliness she carried inside." "Does it work?" I asked. She stopped walking and gave me a long look. "Does anything?" I didn't know what to say to that. We passed through the main hall, where the chandelier hung dark and immense above us. At the far end stood the painting, the one that everyone whispered about, the lady in the black veil. The painting was enormous, dominating an entire wall. The woman sat in profile, wearing a jet black gown and gloves, her face hidden by a lace veil. Her hands were pale and elegant, resting in her lap as though waiting. The background behind her was pure shadow, painted so skillfully that I couldn't tell where her figure ended and the darkness began. "She commissioned it herself," Mrs. Hanley said. "Abigail Bell's final portrait, completed just weeks before her death. Every curator since has insisted it stays here." I stared a little too long. There was something about the way her veil caught the light, thin as breath, but impenetrable. Beneath it, I thought I saw movement, as if the underlying features were shifting slightly, adjusting. Mrs. Hanley's voice drew me back. "You'll work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The cleaning staff leaves by 8 p.m. No visitors, of course. The alarms are already set. We simply need someone present. The insurance requires it." She led me to a small office at the end of the east corridor, my station. It contained an old wooden desk, a wall of security monitors, and a single flickering lamp. On the desk sat a leather-bound notebook. "Those belong to the last night guard," she said, almost offhandedly. "He left them behind when he quit." "When was that?" I asked. 3 months ago." She hesitated. "He wasn't well and left suddenly. Didn't collect his last check. We found this on his desk the next morning." Before I could ask what she meant, she was already turning toward the exit. "I'll lock up behind me. "You'll get used to the quiet." That was a lie. When the doors shut, the silence pressed down like velvet. Even the air seemed to hum faintly, as if the house itself was waiting for something. I settled behind the monitors, watching the still images of empty rooms. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I drank bitter coffee, wandered the halls, and tried not to think about how easily my life had shrunk to this. But at exactly 1:11 a.m., I heard something. It was faint and distant. A slow, deliberate clicking, echoing down the marble corridor. I turned toward the sound, expecting to see a late worker, but the hallway was empty. The click stopped. But then, I caught another sound. The brush of fabric, a whispering shift, like someone turning just out of sight. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Nothing. When I checked the nearest monitor, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On camera 4, the portrait of the lady in the black veil appeared slightly different. Her head was turned just a fraction more toward the viewer. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, leaned in closer. The angle was subtle but unmistakable. I told myself it must have been the lighting, a trick of reflection, maybe a glitch in the camera feed. Still, I left my chair and walked back into the main hall. The painting looked as it had before, serene, distant, utterly still. But standing before it in the dark, I felt a subtle current in the air, a pulse of static that made the hairs on my arms lift. Then I noticed the notebook again. I hadn't touched it since Mrs. Hanley left. It now lay open. My name, Daniel, was written across the top of the page, underlined twice. And beneath it, in hurried handwriting, were 5 rules. Rule 1. If you hear heels clicking behind you, stand still. Rule 2. When you smell roses, leave the room and close the door to it. Rule 3. If you see her reflection in any glass, do not look away until it disappears on its own. She hates to be forgotten. Rule 4. If you see the lady in another painting, cover it immediately. Rule 5. If her veil begins to lift, do not look at her face. My heart began to hammer. I told myself it had to be a prank, maybe Mrs. Hanley trying to spook me, or the last guard having some twisted fun before quitting. But as I stared at those words, something in the house shifted. The temperature dropped. An incomprehensible scent drifted through the air. I slammed the notebook shut, and somewhere, deep in the darkened gallery, I swore I heard that same sound again. A slow, elegant rhythm, echoing on the marble floor. I told myself I wouldn't let my imagination get the better of me again. All day, I blamed the strangeness of that first night on sleep deprivation, the isolation, maybe even the faint smell of turpentine that clung to my uniform. The human brain sees patterns where it shouldn't, I reminded myself. It was just my mind trying to paint ghosts where there were none. By the time I returned that evening, the setting sun had turned the mansion's windows into sheets of dull gold. From the outside, it looked peaceful, even beautiful. You'd never guess that half its art felt alive after midnight. Mrs. Hanley was in her office this time, reviewing a stack of invoices. She looked up briefly as I clocked in. "Any problems last night?" she asked without much interest. "None worth mentioning." She smiled faintly. "Good. The last guard said that too, until he quit." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she'd already returned to her papers. The conversation was over. The longer I stayed, the more I understood why the last guard might have started writing rules. It gave you a sense of control in a place that quietly resisted logic. Still, I couldn't get that clicking sound out of my head. It had followed me into my dream, echoing through an empty hallway, fading just before I turned to see who was there. By the time the clock hit 11, I'd settled into the rhythm again. Patrol, return, watch the monitors, repeat. The gallery was hushed tonight, the silence thick enough to hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights in the ceiling. My flashlight beams swept across the portraits as I walked, their gilded frames gleaming like open mouths. The east corridor was my least favorite. It was narrow, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow you no matter where you walked. Some of them were from the 1800s, their subjects frozen in that strange, unflattering stillness that only old oil paintings managed to capture. Their colors seemed to drink the light instead of reflecting it. And then there was her, the lady in the black veil. She occupied the far end of the main hall, framed in gilt and shadow, the only piece lit by its own isolated spotlight. Every time I passed her, I could feel my pulse quicken. It wasn't fear exactly, more like fascination laced with unease. That night, I stopped in front of her longer than I meant to. I told myself I was studying technique. The brushwork was immaculate, the texture of the veil so delicate that it almost seemed translucent. Beneath it, I thought I saw hints of a face. Not details, just shapes, like something moving beneath black water. The longer I looked, the more I felt she was looking back. Her veil shimmered faintly, though the air was still. I told myself it was just the light shifting from the monitor behind me, except the monitors were all the way down the hall. I took a step back. Her hands seemed lower than before, closer to her knees. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. The hands were normal, perfectly still. I was tired, that was all. My brain was just trying to find movement where there was none. At midnight, I returned to the office and flipped through the notebook again. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't what it seemed, that the rules were some weird joke, that the previous guard hadn't been serious. But as I turned the pages, I noticed faint marks pressed into the paper, like someone had written on the sheet above it long ago. The indentations formed words. I could barely make them out, but one stood out clearly enough. I heard her again. The handwriting trailed off into scratches. That was when the hum started. At first, I thought it was the air conditioning, but the gallery didn't have central air. The sound came from the walls. Low, tremulous, vibrating just enough to make the framed paintings quiver on their hooks. I left the office and followed it down the corridor. It grew louder near the grand staircase, where a large mirror hung between two oil portraits. The glass was old, its surface slightly warped, so my reflection came back stretched, thin and ghostly. But behind my reflection, just for a moment, I saw something move. A shadow of a woman, tall and draped in black, gliding silently past the far end of the hall. My breath caught, I turned. Nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was gone. The glass showed the empty corridor, but I was standing in front of it. I took a step back, heart pounding, and my reflection flickered back into place, lagging a second behind my movements, like it was trying to remember how to be me. I walked away fast, trying not to look at any reflective surface again that night. Around 2 a.m., the security lights dimmed on their own. I could still see the hallways through the monitors, but each feed had a faint distortion, like a heat wave crawling across the image. In one camera, I thought I saw someone standing just inside the ladies' exhibit, motionless. When I blinked, the figure was gone. The mansion seemed to breathe with me, the wood creaking softly in rhythm with my own shallow inhales. I heard faint whispering from one of the side rooms, but when I checked, there was only a series of unfinished landscapes. Mountains, rivers, forests. Still, I could have sworn the last painting, a sunset over a black sea, now had something new in the water, feminine shape. At 3 p.m. came the sound. It was faint at first, coming from somewhere behind me. Sharp, measured, unmistakably human. The sound of heels tapping against hardwood floors. I froze. I hadn't heard anyone enter. Mrs. Hanley had gone home hours ago. No one else was supposed to be here. The sound grew clearer, closer. My breath caught in my throat. And then, as if my memory had waited for the perfect moment to betray me, I remembered the first line from the old notebook. Rule 1. If you hear heels clicking behind you, stand still. It seemed absurd to take it seriously, but absurdity felt safer than turning around. So I obeyed. I stood there, rigid, the beam of my flashlight trembling against the wall. The clicking continued for another few seconds, circling me. The sound wasn't echoing randomly. It was moving, weaving behind me, like someone pacing in slow, measured steps. I could almost feel it then, a faint breath against the back of my neck, as though someone were standing inches away, leaning in. I wanted to move. Every instinct screamed to run, to turn, to look. but the rule echoed louder in my head. Stand still. The air grew colder. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric, the drag of silk against the floorboards, and then absolute silence. I counted to 5 before daring to breathe again. When I finally turned, the corridor was empty. Only the faint shimmer of dust motes drifted through the beam of my flashlight. But something had changed. The lady in the black veil's portrait was turned slightly askew, as though someone had brushed against it. My pulse spiked. I approached slowly, each step loud against the floorboards. When I reached the frame, I noticed that the plaque beneath it, Abigail Bell, 1889, had been scratched by something sharp. The faint lines formed what looked like letters, messy and uneven. I hear you. The paint on her veil looked darker now, as if the black had deepened overnight, swallowing all light. I needed to steady my breathing, trying not to imagine that I could see the faint outline of her mouth under the gauze. I was about to go back to the office when the scent of roses pierced my nose. Faint at first, like perfume from another room. Sweet, floral, and wrong. It didn't belong here. My stomach twisted. I didn't need the notebook to remind me what that meant, but the words still surfaced from memory. Rule 2. If you smell roses, leave the room and close the door to it. The hallway ahead curved into the east wing, the direction the smell was coming from. I stopped at the corner, gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. The scent was stronger now. It clung to the air like invisible smoke. I could taste it, that faint rot underneath the sweetness. Something in the dark beyond that corner waited. I don't know how I knew it, but I felt watched, like the painted figures hanging along the walls were all holding their breath. The corridor's end was dim, the overhead bulb flickering in slow rhythm. Beneath the portrait of Abigail Bell, something had appeared on the floor, a single wilted rose. Its petals were dark red, glistening as though dipped in paint. And yet, as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't paint. It was fresh. A smear of crimson trailed from the stem toward the base of the portrait frame, where the wooden floor met the wall. It was as if the flower had been dragged out from behind the canvas itself. That's when I noticed it, the rhythmic creak from within the wall. The scent thickened, almost choking me now. My instinct screamed, "Get out." I backed away, eyes fixed on the portrait. The black veil painted over the woman's face looked glossier somehow, as though the paint were still wet. I took one last look at that rose on the floor, then forced myself to turn and leave. I flung the door shut and twisted the lock. The smell stopped instantly, cut off like a switch. The air turned cold but clean again. I leaned against the door, listening. For a long moment, there was nothing. No heels, no roses. Then, just once, from the other side of the door, a single knock, soft and polite. I whispered into the silence, "Who are you?" No answer, only the faint sound of fabric sliding down the wood, as if someone had rested their cheek against the door before stepping away. When I returned to the security office, the East Wing camera was offline. Every other feed showed empty halls. But on the office desk lay something that hadn't been there before. A single dried rose petal, perfectly preserved. The scent had faded, but it lingered in my clothes for the rest of the night. I logged the entire thing in the notebook of a former security guard, because I needed to put it somewhere. Otherwise, it would just sit in my head, festering. I finished my shift in silence, too afraid to even sit down. When Mrs. Hanley arrived at 6, I nearly startled her with how fast I handed over the keys. She looked me over carefully. "You're pale, Mr. Keene. Rough night." "Just tired," I said. But even as I stepped out into the morning sun, I swore I heard it again. Faint and distant heels, following me all the way to my car. I should have quit this shitty job. I should have clocked out the moment I saw that portrait shift. But fear does strange things. It can make you freeze, or it can make you curious. And curiosity, I've learned, is a cousin of death in places like this. I told myself it was about pride, that I needed the paycheck, that I wasn't going to let some drafty old mansion rattle me. But the truth was uglier. I wanted to see her again. That night, the city felt unusually still. Even little rocks hum. The distant traffic, the bars downtown, seemed muffled. As I unlocked the heavy doors of the gallery, the smell of roses was gone, replaced by the cold scent of stone and oil paint. The paintings seemed different tonight, not obviously changed. Not enough to call anyone over and point at details, but something was off. There was a landscape I'd always liked in the west corridor, evening over the river, soft brushstrokes, a faded sunset, a steamboat drifting lazily on the water. But as I passed it, I could have sworn there was a figure standing on the bank, just under the willow tree. A woman, faint and blurred into the pigment. When I stopped to look closer, the spot was empty again. Still, my stomach turned over. I didn't cover it then. I told myself I was imagining things. But later that night, I'd regret that hesitation. I made my way through the East Hall, flashlight beams sweeping over gilt frames and marble pedestals. The portraits seemed to follow me, or maybe it was just the way the light moved across the varnish. As I turned the corner, my light caught another painting. One I hadn't noticed before. It was a small oil piece, early 19th century, depicting a lavish ballroom filled with faceless dancers. But near the center of the frame, a woman in black stood perfectly still. Her veil was half raised, as though she'd been caught mid-motion. She hadn't been there before. I was certain of it. My hand went numb. I ripped the tarp from a nearby crate and threw it over the frame, nearly tearing the canvas. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst through my ribs. I stood there for what must have been 10 minutes, staring at the covered painting, listening for footsteps, whispers, anything. At that moment, the lights flickered and everything went dark. The emergency lights kicked on, dim red bulbs bathing the hall in a sickly glow. My reflection swam faintly across the glass display cases, and I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In every polished frame, every reflective surface, her silhouette was there, sometimes close behind me, sometimes distant, watching from the next room. I didn't dare move. The rain drummed against the windows, the sound like frantic fingers on glass. I forced myself to breathe through the panic, to remember the rules, to cling to them like scripture. Finally, the power surged back. The overhead lights snapped on, flooding the hallway in pale fluorescence. The reflections vanished. I dropped my flashlight and leaned against the wall, gasping for air. When I finally found the strength to look up again, the tarp I'd thrown over the ballroom painting had fallen to the floor. The canvas was blank. Every dancer, every wall, even the chandeliers, all gone, as if scraped away. When I got back to the office, something small and strange caught my attention. The security mirror above my desk, the convex one meant to show blind spots, was fogged over. A faint ring of condensation pulsed slowly across its surface, like a breath that didn't belong to me. I leaned forward, squinting, and then I saw it. A figure standing behind me in the reflection. Black dress, lace sleeves, veil cascading down like smoke. Every muscle in my body froze. I knew the rule: do not look away. My hand trembled against the desk, eyes burning from not blinking. The figure didn't move, but the mirror rippled, as though the glass itself were water. The air grew heavy, humming with a low frequency that crawled beneath my skin. Her head tilted slowly, veil brushing her shoulders. I couldn't see her face, but even through the distortion, I sensed that faint mockery in the gesture, as if she were testing my obedience. The hum grew louder. Then, just at the edge of the reflection, I noticed something impossible. All the other paintings visible in the mirror now included her silhouette, faint but distinct. She had multiplied across the gallery. My body wanted to look away, to shut my eyes and make it stop, but the rule echoed in my head. She hates to be forgotten. Without warning, the reflection moved. Her hand, bony, almost luminous, reached out from under the veil and pressed flat against the inside of the glass. The fogged surface indented outward, the way frost buckles before it cracks. My chest locked. I whispered, "Please, go." The hand lingered a second longer, trembling, then slowly withdrew. The reflection faded. the condensation vanishing as if inhaled by the mirror itself. When I blinked again, the only thing in the glass was me. Pale, sweating, hollow-eyed. I sank into the chair and tried to steady my breathing. The notebook on the desk flipped open on its own. The pages rustled until they stopped at the third rule. A faint gray smear, like a fingerprint in charcoal, stained the paper beside it. I couldn't keep working after what happened. My hands were shaking too badly, and every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear those footsteps circling behind me. Crisp, deliberate, echoing against the marble. I sat in the security office until the first hint of dawn, staring at the monitors, waiting for something else to move. But nothing did. That morning, when the curator arrived, I lied. Said I dozed off and imagined things. She looked skeptical but didn't ask questions. I could tell from the faint exhaustion in her eyes that she didn't want to know. Nobody did. Still, I needed answers. So, during the day, when the gallery was open and sunlight streamed through the tall windows, I started asking questions about the man who worked there before me. The one whose notebook I'd found. His name was Wesley Horton. I'd seen it scrawled in the corner of some old reports. He'd apparently quit suddenly, citing health reasons, though no one could tell me what kind. When I checked with HR, they said his contact information was out of date, but they still had an emergency number on file, his parents. I wrote it down, hesitated for a while, then dialed from my cell phone while sitting in my car outside the gallery. It rang 5 times before someone answered. Hello. The voice was soft, weary, an old woman's. Mrs. Horton? I asked. My name's Daniel Keene. I work at the Bell Gallery. Your son used to. You found him? She interrupted, the words trembling. My throat went dry. No, ma'am. I just wanted to ask. You shouldn't be calling from there, she said suddenly. Not from that house. The line hissed faintly, like something breathing between us. Mrs. Horton, I said carefully. What happened to your son? She didn't answer right away. I heard her whisper something before speaking again. Maybe a prayer. He stopped coming home. Said he couldn't sleep anymore. Said he was seeing things move in the paintings. I closed my eyes. One night, she continued, he called me. Said he'd done something wrong. That she was angry. I told him to come home, but he just hung up. We never heard from him again. The silence stretched. I could hear her shallow breathing on the other end. Did the police? They came, yes, she said. They searched the gallery. They said there was no sign of him. But 2 days later, her voice wavered. Someone came to the door, said she was my son. I frowned. She? Yes, she whispered. An old woman, dressed in his uniform, his badge pinned to her jacket. She said, Mama, it's me. But her voice sounded like his. The same tone, the same way of saying my name. I screamed. My husband called the police. A shiver crawled up my spine. They took her away, she continued. But before they did, she looked right at me and said, She keeps her promises, Mama. Her voice cracked on the last word. I couldn't speak. Please, she said after a long pause. If you're working there, quit. Leave that house. Don't look at her. Don't let her see your face. Then the line went dead. My eyes stung. My head throbbed. But I couldn't stop replaying the phone call with the missing guard's mother. A strange old woman dressed in men's clothes. The words circled in my skull like moths around a dying bulb. She'd said the woman claimed to be her son. Her voice had cracked when she added that the police thought she was insane. But I just couldn't follow her advice and walk away from this job. I needed to get to the root of the matter. I've come too far to stop now. When I arrived at the gallery that evening, the air outside was thick and heavy, the kind of air that made you feel watched. The curator had left early, her heels clicking briskly down the hall. I stayed in the lobby a few minutes longer than usual, listening to the silence settle back in. That deep, suffocating quiet that only truly old houses know. Then, I made my way to the office where I kept the notebook of rules. I had started treating it like a diary now, writing my own notes in the margins, trying to make sense of it. I flipped it open, hoping to distract myself with something rational. At that moment, I saw it, a sixth rule, written in the same looping, elegant hand as the others. Rule 6. When you pass Lady Bell's portrait, kneel down and greet her by name. The ink shimmered slightly, as if still wet. My stomach turned. This wasn't written by the previous guard. He'd never mentioned anything beyond Rule 5 in the margins. This was new. I felt watched again. The office door was open and I could see down the hall, the long stretch leading toward the main hall where her portrait hung. The air shimmered faintly, the way heat does over asphalt. I told myself not to go, but my legs were already moving. The mansion's gallery stretched endlessly in the dim light, portraits flanking me like silent witnesses. I passed a painting, once a pastoral scene, now showed something small and black standing in the distance between the trees. A smudge, a figure impossible to identify. The lady was moving. Her presence seeped through the frames like ink bleeding through parchment. I realized, with a sick twist in my gut, that she wasn't confined anymore. When I reached her hall, I noticed immediately what was wrong. Her portrait wasn't quite the same. The angle of her head had shifted slightly. Her veil, once obscuring all but the faintest outline of her face, had lifted a little. The pale suggestion of a cheekbone glowed beneath it. The smell of roses hit me so hard I gagged. I stumbled backward, slamming the door to the room as fast as I could, remembering the rule. My reflection in the glass display case beside me looked feverish, sweat slick, not entirely mine. When I finally steadied myself, I went back to the office, determined to burn that damned notebook. I pulled open the drawer, grabbed the lighter I kept for my cigarettes, and froze. Every page was filled, covered edge to edge with words. Greet her, greet her, greet her. The ink bled through the paper like veins. The lights flickered. In the brief blackout, I heard something scrape against the wall. A dragging sound, as though something heavy brushed against canvas. When the lights came back, the notebook was gone. I turned in a slow circle, every nerve alert. The mirror on the opposite wall was darker, as though a fog had settled behind the glass. And in that dim surface, I saw her. Not her full face. Never that. Just the veil swaying gently, though no wind moved. I didn't dare look away. The reflection began to shift. Her head tilted, almost curiously, and her outline blurred. The glass rippled like water, her form wading through it, pulling herself toward the light of the room. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair, eyes locked on that undulating surface. My heart hammered so loud it drowned out everything. Then silence. The glass cleared. The office was empty again, except for one thing. On the desk, where the notebook had been, lay a single black rose. Fresh, glistening, and dripping a faint trail of dark water. When I picked it up, the petals left streaks of ink across my fingers. And underneath, in faint, perfect handwriting on the wood, were the words, "Good evening, Daniel." I dropped the rose. It rolled across the desk, leaving an oily trail that pulsed faintly in the flickering light. Outside, thunder rolled through the city. Low, distant, but coming closer. That's when the first frame began to shake. The small painting above the office door, a still life of a bowl of fruit, rattled violently against the wall, glass cracking down the middle. I stared frozen as the apple inside darkened, its color draining until it was nothing but a gray sunken husk. Then the pear began to move, almost shyly, as if some invisible hand were pressing from the inside of the canvas. I stumbled backward and hit the edge of the desk. The rose fell to the floor, the petals dissolving into black water that spread in thin veins across the tiles. Another crash of thunder. The mansion's lights died. The emergency lamps sputtered to life a few seconds later, washing the corridor outside in dim red. The walls looked alive in that light, like skin stretched over something vast and breathing. I forced myself out of the office. The gallery corridor stretched ahead, lined with portraits, landscapes, and sculptures I now viewed as predators waiting in their cages. At the end of the corridor, a door swung slowly open on its own. The main hall, her hall, My flashlight cut a trembling beam across the threshold. The smell of roses thickened until I could barely breathe. She was there. Her portrait no longer hung flush against the wall. It bulged outward, like something behind the canvas was pressing to get out. The paint around her figure rippled, and then I heard heels clicking behind me. I froze where I was. My lungs ached from holding my breath. The clicking drew closer. I kept my eyes forward, staring into the main hall. The air shimmered again, and her silhouette began to separate from the painting. Her veil fluttered. The colors of the portrait dripped down like melting wax, and her form stepped free, tall, graceful, impossible. For a moment, her veil floated behind her like smoke. I could feel her gaze, even though I couldn't see her face. The heels stopped right behind me now. I didn't move. My eyes locked on her shape ahead. Her voice broke the silence. Soft, melodic, but distant, like sound underwater. "Daniel," she whispered, "why don't you greet me?" My entire body tensed. That was the 6th rule. She glided closer, drifting. Every painting she passed flickered. Faces turned to watch her. Landscapes changed. Figures inside their frames leaned toward me, mouths opening silently. I stepped back once, breaking the stillness. The clicking resumed instantly, circling me, echoing from every direction. Dozens of footsteps now. I looked to my right and stiffened. The portraits nearest me were alive. Their subjects. Painted nobles, children, soldiers, now twisted in agony. Some had black veils over their faces. Others pressed their palms against the inside of the glass, as if begging me to switch places. Their eyes tracked me as I moved. Lightning exploded through the window. For a split second, I saw everything clearly. The lady halfway between her painting and the real world, her veil rippling in the sudden light. And behind her, a second figure, faint, gray, and terrified. The previous security guard. His face was melting into hers. When the thunder hit, the room went dark again. I ran. The hall seemed endless. Every doorway I passed showed another painting of her. The lady standing in fields, in gardens, at banquets. Her veil shifting, her hands reaching. Each time lightning flashed, she was closer. By the time I reached the lobby, the air was freezing cold, and the windows had gone opaque with condensation. I turned toward the main doors, locked. But I hadn't locked them, I never locked them. Behind me, paintings began to fall from the walls, frames shattering. I turned just in time to see one hit the marble floor, the painted face of a man screaming as the glass cracked across it. Then another sound joined the storm outside. Her voice again, almost in my ear. "Why do you look away, Daniel?" I spun, flashlight trembling in my hand. Every reflective surface held her image. Hundreds of her. The veils began to lift, one by one. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was her veil, rising like a curtain at the end of a play. When I came to, I was on the marble floor of the lobby. My flashlight still rolled faintly, its beam sweeping in slow arcs across the shattered frames. Every sound was amplified. The storm hammering the glass dome above me, the groaning of old timber, the hollow drip of rain seeping. The air still carried the thick scent of roses, cloying and rot-sweet, like flowers left too long in the grave. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd blacked out from fear, that the visions had been hallucinations, born from exhaustion. But then I turned my head and saw the empty frame. The lady's portrait was gone. The gold frame hung on the wall like a mouth missing its teeth, the torn scraps of canvas fluttering faintly in the storm wind that somehow pushed through the sealed windows. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the flashlight, nearly slipped on the wet floor, and ran for the maintenance room. My hands shook so violently that I dropped the keys twice before I got the door open. Inside, I found the canisters of paint thinner stacked near the wall, the same ones I'd used to clean the marble steps my first night. I took one in each hand and turned back toward the main hall. I don't know if I thought I could win. I just knew I couldn't let her live in those walls any longer. The hallway stretched ahead like a throat leading down into something that breathed. Every painting I passed had gone wrong. A mother in a domestic scene now stood alone, hands bloody. A tranquil seascape showed a ship, sinking under black water. But I didn't stop. When I reached the main hall, lightning lit the room in a searing flash, and there she was. The portrait had returned. The lady in the black veil hung proudly once again, her frame pristine, as though untouched by time. But her posture was different now, more alive. Her gloved hands were pressed against the inside of the canvas. Her voice seeped from everywhere at once. "You would destroy me?" she whispered. "When all I ever did was watch you?" My chest tightened. "You're not real," I muttered. "You're paint and lies." She laughed. Soft, elegant, poisonous. "And yet, I breathe while you rot, Daniel Keene. You paint nothing. You guard others' work because you could never make your own. What are you but a man who failed at beauty?" Lightning flashed again, and I saw her hand press through the canvas. The frame cracked. I splashed the paint thinner across the floor, across the base of her pedestal, the smell burning my nostrils. My hands trembled as I struck the lighter. "Go back," I said, "where you belong." But she was already halfway out. The veil fluttered in invisible wind, spreading like wings. Her form stretched, the edges of her gown trailing into the other paintings, infecting them. I could see her face turning toward me beneath the sheer fabric, her head tilting like a curious predator. "Look at me," she said. "Remember me." I threw the lighter. Flame bloomed across the floor, racing along the thinner, catching the edge of the frame. The fire crawled up the wall, golden light reflecting in every glass surface. The lady screamed in fury. Her veil flared like black smoke, and suddenly the fire stopped. The flames froze midair, trembling. She stepped out fully. Her figure was pale and tall, her gown black as obsidian. Her veil floated behind her. The eyes beneath the veil glowed faintly, two cold, silver mirrors. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The other paintings now showed me, screaming, burning, collapsing, like glimpses of futures that hadn't yet happened. "You think destruction frees you?" she whispered, gliding toward me. "You think fire undoes eternity?" She reached out. Her gloved hand brushed my cheek, and for a second, the sensation was warm, tender, until I saw the face beneath the veil. The previous guard, I recognized him. His expression was twisted in mute horror, his mouth moving in a silent scream as her skin rippled over his, absorbing it, wearing it like a mask. My vision blurred, my body felt weightless. The smell of roses filled every breath. Her voice softened, intimate and close. "I will not be forgotten." I woke to sunlight. It came through the gallery's tall windows in sheets of gold, painting everything in quiet stillness. The fire was gone. The smoke, the wind, the storm. All of it had vanished as if the night itself had been erased. I sat up slowly, my body aching, my throat raw, my palms blistered from gripping the lighter. The floor was cold beneath me, smooth marble instead of soot. The lady's portrait hung before me, pristine once again. Her veil drawn, her frame unscarred. No scorch marks, no smell of smoke, just blissful silence. I pushed myself to my feet and stumbled closer, staring at the portrait. Everything was perfect. The brushstrokes gleamed with the faintest varnish sheen. Her pose was exactly as it had been when I first saw her. A woman of impossible poise, her gloved hand resting gently on her lap. The only difference was the veil. It seemed thinner now, almost translucent. If I leaned just a little closer, I thought I could make out the faint curve of a face beneath it. A suggestion of age, of weariness. Of me? My head swam. I needed air. The front doors were still locked. The curator wouldn't arrive for another hour. I headed for the restroom, moving like a sleepwalker. My boots echoed softly in the empty halls, and for once, no answering footsteps followed. No heels behind me, no perfume of roses. Only my breathing, and that too seemed wrong. It rasped slightly, thin and trembling. I splashed water on my face. The porcelain sink gleamed white, spotless. Then I looked up. The mirror stared back, but it wasn't me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the morning glare distorting the glass. I leaned closer, squinting. The figure in the reflection moved with me, but its skin was parchment pale, its cheeks hollowed, its mouth sunken and drawn tight like dried clay. Wisps of gray hair framed a face that was no longer mine. An old woman's face. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, my heart jackhammered. I raised a trembling hand to my cheek, and in the mirror the old woman did the same, but her fingers lagged, half a second behind. The skin of my own hand looked normal, pink and scarred from work, but the reflection's hand was thin, veined, gloved. I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. The mirror rippled, like water disturbed by a breath. And behind that watery surface, I saw the lady, smiling from within. Her veil was gone now. Her face was mine. "No, please," I said, shaking my head, backing toward the door. The air around me thickened. The scent of roses bloomed again, stronger than ever. Heady, choking, sweet with decay. The overhead lights flickered, dimmed, and one by one the paintings in the hallway outside began to glow faintly. Each frame showed me standing there, older, my features unraveling, my flesh fading away. In the mirror, the old woman's mouth curved into a knowing smile. "You remembered me," she whispered, though I hadn't spoken. "And now, you wear my true face." I screamed and swung my fist at the glass. It shattered in a sharp burst, raining shards across the tiles. But even in each fragment, her reflection lingered. Dozens of tiny faces, all smiling that same cold smile. I didn't grab my jacket or my bag. The marble stairs blurred beneath me as I bolted for the side door and burst into daylight. The world outside looked washed out, colorless, unreal. I collapsed on the curb, gasping, trembling, trying to make sense of it. I ran my hands over my face again and again, feeling only my own skin, but I didn't trust it. I pulled out my phone and flipped the camera toward me. The reflection came instantly. Her face, her eyes, her faint painted smile. And in that frozen image, her voice echoed one last time, triumphant and eternal. "I told you, Daniel Keene, I hate to be forgotten." The phone slipped from my hands and shattered on the pavement. When I picked it up again, the screen was dead black. But in the faint reflection of the glass, I could still see her veil fluttering.